Deaf community is made up of generally people who are born deaf and who use sign language to communicate. However, the situations can change based on the varying amount of deafness that the people cannot hear, and then also some people do not rely solely on signing, and some people are able to communicate through oral language even though they experience deafness. Some stats on the groups. In Arkansas, we found that 500 to 11,000 individuals have profound hearing loss. We found that 26,000 to 64,000 are severely hearing impaired, and 100,000 to 400,000 experience hearing loss in general. So you can see with the statistics that being profoundly not able to hear is a lot less common than just having some hearing loss in general. So we have discovered that the deaf community is actually considered as its own culture, because a culture is typically used to describe the patterns, traits, products, attitudes, and intellectual or artistic activity associated with a particular population. So the deaf community can be thought of to have their own culture. Some examples of their culture would be they have their own deaf cultural arts. So they have their own art exhibits and artists who do photographs, they do painting, they do sculptures, they do a lot of things just like the cultural arts in any culture. And sometimes you cannot even tell that the person who did the art was deaf. So that's really cool. They also have deaf theater, where they have deaf actors and hearing actors, and they are able to put on productions. They have books on deafness, and they that were written by deaf people or just for deaf people. They have a deaf cinema. They have a festival that takes place each year that presents movies of deaf people that were produced by deaf people. They have poems. They have their own kind of humor, deaf humor that focuses on the deaf experience. They have their own language, so sign language is an aspect of deaf culture that is most closely identified with deafness. The deaf and hearing people who are active signers or native signers, or they grew up with the sign language, tend to have the most fluent signing skills. They also share a common goal, which would be that they are accepted by the general public as equals. So although they are deaf, they hate to be thought of as disabled or less than or not equal. And so when you act sad or act like it's that they're overcoming something great by being deaf, it can oftentimes be offensive to them because all they want to be is seen as equal by everyone.
Hello, my name is Calvin Johnson. My sign name is KJ. And I'm from Marianna, Arkansas. I grew up in Marianna, Arkansas, small country town. And I have 5 brothers and 1 sister. And most of my family are hard of hearing. But me and my brother Daniel are more finally deaf. And we grew up at the Arkansas School for the deaf.
Maybe do you have any hobbies, or what do you like to do?
Right now I'm more focused on bringing the gap between the deaf and the hearing loss. But I'm so much involved with my community here. And I do a lot with the nonprofit organization.
Okay.
It's called Deaf United Organization.
Okay.
And we go out and bring education awareness between the deaf and the hearing. Which means going out to the hospital, to school.
Communication is a large part of the deaf community. Though some may not be able to speak, many use a tool of lip reading in order to understand what someone is saying. According to lipreading.org, lip reading allows you to listen to a speaker by watching the speaker's face to figure out their speech patterns, movements, gestures, and expressions. Often called a third ear, lip reading goes beyond simply reading the lips of a speaker to decipher individual words. In order to lip read successfully, you must also read the face to uncover other nonverbal clues about the situation. Reading someone's face can tell you an individual's tone, mood, and so much more. HearingLink.org says, when we communicate with others, our words make up only 7% of our total communication. 38% is our vocal signals, and 55% is our body language, or nonverbal communication. Face reading helps create a sense of hearing, just like it does in the hearing community. If they see or hear something that doesn't match the facial expressions or body language, we often ignore what has been said and focus instead on the moods and feelings conveyed throughout the body. to react accordingly. This is no
Are there
different than
any
what
like slang words that y'all use, like any slang signs that you guys use like in conversation as being a part of like a deaf community?
Sometimes sign language is not the same in every area. The north and south have different sign names. It's very different. It's not the same. People in north, they sound fast, they talk fast. Okay. And it changes, like California sign, they may change a little. And so, not like sound in Arkansas or.
According to the National Association of the Deaf, or the NAD, too often media representations lack authenticity and present a distorted view of the deaf and hard of hearing community, and this misrepresentation deprives the public of an accurate understanding of a community that is rich in culture and language. If you pay attention to the media, people who are deaf are often portrayed as not being able to do a variety of things because of their hearing. What we fail to realize is that people who are deaf can do all the things that hearing people can, they just have their own way of doing them. To give a basic example, sign language interpreter and community educator Lydia Callis says that what the telephone and radio did for hearing communication, text messaging, and social media have done for deaf communications. The point is that we tend to forget that there are other ways to accomplish tasks, and just because people who are deaf use those alternative ways, it does not make them the wrong way. The media also portrays those who are deaf as people that need to be fixed or cured, but in reality, according to the NAD, they do not feel like they need to be cured or fixed through technology or therapy. As it turns out, being deaf has its own culture, and many individuals do not see a need to leave this
how
culture.
the media portrays you, what would you change?
I think the change in the word can. That's a very negative word for our, because that can't word put a very big on a lot of things that we can't, but we can. And so I think that needs to be changed to say maybe a better word or a better action would be, how can it be done? And find a way solution, because there's always, there's no limitation. I mean, I think they put us in a box. We can be a doctor, we can drive a plane, we can do just about anything.
One of the biggest questions among the deaf and hearing communities is deafness a disability or a culture? According to an article from The Atlantic, the trouble is that the former group, who see it as a disability, holds a disproportionate amount of power, and the latter group, the ones who see it as a culture, are the ones affected. The author of the article spoke with one deaf man, Jeff Dupree, who volunteers with Autism Free America and is a proud sixth-generation deaf person. He said, "My whole life I've lived as a deaf person. I've worked and associated with deaf people, and I've had no problem in this world. So why are organizations like this, AGB, trying to take away my right to live the way I want to live, my right to raise my children the way I feel like they should be raised?" For culturally deaf people, to be deaf is a natural state of being. It is an everyday part of their life and their identity. To express sadness or regret for a person's deafness can be considered a lack of acceptance of who they are. According to an article from Aussie Deaf Kids, deaf people do not usually see themselves as disabled or impaired, and dislike being referred to as hearing impaired. The disability they experience is a result of the assumptions and barriers that the Hearing Society imposes on them. This view could perhaps best be explained by the saying, "In a room full of deaf people, it is the hearing person who cannot sign who is disabled." According to The Culture of Deaf People by Carol Patton, the primary goal for the deaf community is to be accepted by the general public as equals.
What are your feelings towards deafness being labeled as a disability?
I've seen and I've always been capable of doing anything. It's just that we can't hear that. We may have different language, different way we wake up, different way we speak, different body language. I mean, we have that, but I feel the word disability use the word can or not able. And if we're able to, we can. It's short a different way, different method.
There is often conflict in the deaf community, especially concerning children. Tina Donvito, in a piece featured in the New York Times, expresses her frustration with choosing how to raise her hard-of-hearing son. She feels pressure from others to not teach her son sign language and feels judged for trying to bridge the gap between herself and her child. This conflict among deaf children and parents is not uncommon. 2 or 3 out of 1,000 children are born with hearing loss, and of those, over 90% of them have hearing parents. StartASL.com says that ASL is commonly thought of to be a version of English, when in fact it is not. It is its own language with its own syntax and its own grammar, and is as capable as any other language of communicating effectively. It is also a misconception that all deaf people use sign language, when in fact many use it as their second language, if at all. There's a long way to go to obtain complete equality and fully bridge the gap between the deaf and the hearing, but Arkansas has certainly taken steps to ensure that the deaf community is being advocated for. OvationHearing.com lists several resources such as the Arkansas Association of the Deaf, Disability Rights Arkansas, and Arkansas School for the Deaf that are pursuing the rights, equality, and advocacy of the deaf and the hard of hearing.
In the deaf community has allowed you to see the world differently at all?
We can bring awareness what's out there. I think we have seen a lot, and we will be seeing more. But I think what we're seeing is the wall coming down. Before we've seen that barrier wall. But it's becoming so much better of working for what's out there. And the deaf part of the land. And I think a lot of deaf churches are seeing that improvement. But wanting more. And sure, that's right. I mean, now in 2018, we're moving. Seeing things so much better with technology and people hiring and through the system.